Murph, how are you, man?
Man, did you do that on purpose? I love Dave Matthews.
No, that's one of my favorite bands. That's it's the promo music to the show.
Well, I went to the what was it, about 3 weeks ago when he was in town?
Oh, yeah.
Did you get to go to that?
I was there with him and Tim Reynolds playing acoustically.
Oh yeah, yep, it was awesome.
Well, Murph, now that you've been a little bit removed from it, what are your thoughts on your season this year? Obviously, had some peaks and valleys, but I would imagine as a coach and a competitor, really proud of the way your team fought down the stretch.
Oh, definitely. And after thinking about it for quite a while, I took a couple plane trips and went home to Iowa. That's like a 2.5-hour flight, so a lot of time to just sit and think about stuff. And there was a lot of ways that we overachieved and a couple things where we underachieved. But at the end, there's 4 stages of team building, and it goes on in a family, in an athletic team, in a business, a corporation, whatever. And the last stage of team building is performing. And every team that's played for me at Alabama knows that the last stage is where we want to be in May. And I really thought that this year they did it again. And you want to be playing your best at the end of the year, and we've kind of almost to a self-fulfilling prophecy sort of thing where we've talked about it nonstop. And I think the kids buy in and believe it. And we were one run away from beating Florida, who played for the national championship. And I think we also know the reason why we were seeded 16th. So we need to do something about that, in 2018 and not be in that same position. Because obviously, this, and all of our listeners know that when you play at home, you got a much better chance, especially in a super regional atmosphere, to advance. And college softball has become college baseball, where it used to be there was no home field advantage. And now, you look at the seeds and you're like, please, let us be in the top 8 so we can host both rounds. So, I love the team. They were one of the easiest groups to coach, no issues on and off the field. Team GPA at 3.7, and just a group of low-maintenance kids, which is what I like.
You mentioned you started playing your best softball when it mattered most. Was there something, and this is so difficult when you ask a competitor what happened, but did you notice anything from observing your team that sparked them? What was the I guess the igniter to get them going the right way?
I think, to be honest with you, when we went over to Ole Miss and lost the second game, I think it was on a Saturday, because we knew we were going to get rained out on Sunday. So we played a doubleheader, and we got walked off. They hit a walk-off and won it. And the next day we had, I'll call it an activity, at their batting cages, which were inside. We couldn't get on a track or outside because it was raining, but it was a very difficult 2 hours, hour and a half. And I think the team responded. I had a couple say after in front of everybody, that's exactly what we needed. And we appreciate the coaches for getting us better today. And, there was a stretch where we lost on walk-offs in 5 games. And I think a lot of times a bunch of teams would have just folded their tent right then and there and said, this isn't our year. And, a credit to the seniors and just everybody on the team. Everybody kind of said, okay, so what, now what? Let's get to the next game and figure this out. And, when we went up to the Knoxville or SEC tournament in Knoxville, and Little John pitched a hell of a game to beat Arkansas. Osorio pitched an equally good game and beat A&M in 10 innings. And I think that kind of started it. I think everybody realized this is the type of team that we could be. And then in regionals, you beat the number 1 team in the country. And I don't know if you saw the ranking. They went from number 1 to number 15 at the end of the year. So it was, it was a crazy end of the year. We faced 3 first-team All-Americans the last 2 weekends, and we were the only team in the country that had to do that. So I thought we represented really well.
You mentioned something that was, I guess, a point of contention for certain people in the college softball world. The way they seeded the regionals. Talking to committee members across different sports, they're always looking for ways to get better. But in your opinion, do you like the way it is, the criteria and the metrics that they're using, that they're weighing, or if you had a change to make, what would you make?
Probably the number one thing is to fully explain what it is. What is the number one, stat or whatever you want to call it that you're going to rank these people by? Because I think the biggest mistake that the committee made was when they announced those 2 top 10 rankings, and one of them appeared during our Saturday game against Auburn on that Saturday night on ESPN. Well, Minnesota was in both. And I think everybody assumed that Minnesota was in the top 10. And this was put out by the committee. And then when it came down to it, they said later that top 10 didn't even matter. Well, they probably should have said that, because I'm sure Minnesota was really upset because they were thinking, we're hosting at least regionals. So just to let us know what exactly, what criteria are you going to use and weigh the most, the heaviest, because then I think it would have explained a lot to some people. And I think really after looking at it, I think their big thing was, what was your record versus top 25 and top 50 teams? Because, in the SEC, we finished above LSU, Ole Miss, and Kentucky. All 3 of them were above us in the seeds. So that was just something that I noticed that, we can do better next year.
Talking to Patrick Murphy, head coach of the University of Alabama softball team. I know you're always looking for ways to evolve, to improve. What's the goal for this team, in the off season to get better? Obviously, you want to get better, but what areas are you working on that you want to see improvement on next year?
Well, I'd say number one, after a huge, we basically worked from August 30th to May, whatever it was, 26th. So it's a long, long season. So the first thing is they need the recovery, and then a bunch of them are coming back to work our camp next week. And then they'll start on a program that Michelle Diltz, our strength coach, has put together. And we want to make sure they come in pretty good shape, so when we start our conditioning in the fall, it doesn't take, 3 weeks to get them into shape. And then after that, probably we're just going to go back to some really good fundamental offensive softball and just drill and drill and drill and, just keep going until we get it right. And, and I don't know if it was just a fluke year or what, but it just wasn't our kind of year offensively. So we're going to work on that a lot. Defense was one of the best we've ever had. We only had 37 errors. And everything defensively and pitching improved. The thing that didn't improve was we scored 130 more runs last year as a team, which is just that's just way too many missed opportunities by us this year. And, even if we score, let's just say we score 10 more runs this year, we probably win 3 more games. And instead of being the 16th seed, we're the 12th seed or the 10th. So the margin of error in softball, and this in any sport in the SEC, is the tiniest of margins. And if you don't do it, you're going to pay the price in the end.
Yeah, I was wondering. You mentioned the level of competition that you're playing now in the SEC. When you first started off in this conference, and how the conference has evolved in that time, would you ever have dreamed that every team in the conference would have made a regional? I mean, I don't know that I've ever heard anything like that before. No, that's just amazing. And I think it wasn't baseball 8 of the 14 made it. Yeah. And 13 out of 13 in softball, which is just, and to be honest with you, I thought we'd have a little more pushback from around the country, but I really didn't hear a lot. And I think a lot of people realized that all 13 were deserving. I mean, the lowest RPI, I think, was 32. And Georgia didn't make the SEC tournament, but they were RPI 25. And when 64 make it, you've kind of done your homework, and the resumes were all legit. And Missouri, even though
they were the lowest RPI. They played the toughest schedule of anybody. And, he earned his way in too. So it was just, there's been years before where you could say, okay, I don't have to pitch my number one all weekend, and you'd win all three. And you can't do that anymore. It's the parity is there, and just there's great athletes at every school.
Murph, a lot of people paid attention to that huge Auburn series this year, and man, we would like to see those two teams play every year. Of course, the quirks in the SEC schedule don't allow that. But when you guys topping out at attendance, it's part of the popularity of the sport and the growth of the sport. But specifically to you, you're always looking for a way to improve the fan experience. You've added the Brickyard. You've done different things. Anything in the future, 5-10 years, even sooner? Maybe talk about expanding the stadium.
Really, really sooner, I hope. Because, those 3 games were sold out, first time in the history of our program that before the even first pitch was thrown, 4,015. And what was really cool to me was the same 2 teams were playing in Auburn except for baseball. And we outdrew all 3 games in softball. So it's amazing how far we've come. But the biggest thing right now, and I know Mr. Byrne knows this, and so does my boss, Marie Robbins, is we need a bathroom, a concession, and a ticket booth for the Brickyard, because that's one of our biggest demographics in our crowd. And, our stadium was really built for 1,500 people. But when we added the Brickyard and the plaza above the first base bullpen, it seats 4,000 now. But our amenities haven't improved, the bathroom, the tickets. And the biggest complaint I get, and you could probably guess this, but it's women that have to stand in line to use the restroom, and then they miss 2 innings, and it frustrates the heck out of them. But our concourse was designed for 1,500 fans, and there's a lot more coming to the games now. So I'm hoping that that's something that gets addressed soon. Because another thing, and you'll probably laugh at this, but Rhodes Stadium will be the oldest in the SEC after Florida renovates next summer. Yeah, and I think we're only 18 years old, the stadium, because we were the last to build, and now we're the oldest after Florida does their renovation. So it's just like every sport, you got to keep up with the Joneses.
Yeah, wrapping up here with Patrick Murphy, the head softball coach at the University of Alabama. Not that you've asked for it, but I think you have a certain weight across the college softball landscape that people respect your opinion. So I wanted to ask you, how do you explain this the exponential growth in the sport that we've seen over the last 10, 15, 20 years? Even now on television, it's such a perfect window of a 2-hour game that they can program around. But even beyond that, at the grassroots level, the quality of softball that you're seeing now in some of these high school teams and travel teams, is there something you point to? I mean, is it just we're finally realizing that girls like to compete? I mean, what's the deal?
I'm not sure if this was it, but I kind of knew you were going to ask that. And honestly, I'm telling you the God honest truth. But people will come up to me in Publix or at Mass or at a baseball game or a football game. I don't care where I'm at, the gym, and they'll say, "You know what? You know why I love to watch your team play? Because it looks like they're having fun." And it might be the littlest thing, but when you're paying money to go watch somebody play in a sport, you don't want to go watch somebody that's miserable, because why would you want to watch that? But when they come and when Osorio strikes out the side and the catcher goes nuts and the dugout goes nuts and everybody's happy for her, the crowd reacts the same way. And I think that's a small part of it. I think the other thing is, with our stadiums being, ours is the biggest in the country. And literally 2,000 people can be like right on top of the game. They love to be right there. They get to hear the game. They get to hear me. They get to hear me yelling at the umpire. I mean, you're right on top of the action. I think that lends itself to a really good fan base. And then the other thing, I think there's just really good student athletes to play the game of softball because, yes, there is a pro league, but not many of them are going to go pro. And I think they just have this love of the fans. And we have so many repeat season ticket holders. It's just unbelievable. And they just keep coming back. And I think it's our kids have a lot to do